Decoded.
Ever had a song stuck in your head and you can't quite explain why it resonates so deeply?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
It's like the words are doing something, beyond just their dictionary definitions.
Exactly.
Welcome, everyone, to Book Decoded. We're the place where we unpack fascinating reads, try and give you a fresh perspective.
And today we're getting into Matthew Zapruder's really insightful book, Why Poetry?
Why poetry? Okay.
Yeah, Zapruder, he's a poet himself, and he noticed this weird thing. Lots of folks read poetry, some even write it.
Right.
But there's often this nagging feeling underneath, like, am I really getting this?
Totally. That feeling of maybe missing something.
Precisely. So his book explores that feeling. Why is poetry written? What does it actually do? And crucially, why do we sometimes feel like we need, a secret decoder ring for it?
And I think that feeling, being a bit lost with poetry, it's so common, isn't it?
Definitely.
Maybe it takes you back to like a high school English class where a poem felt more like a math problem than art.
Zapruder gets that. He really does. He wrote this because he wanted to share a clearer way in, one that cuts through the confusion.
So if you ever felt a little intimidated or just unsure about poetry, stick around. This exploration is definitely for you. We're aiming to, demystify it a bit and show its value.
Okay, so let's jump right into one of his big ideas. This notion that poetry is deliberately difficult, like it's some elaborate word game designed to trip us up.
Right, the secret code idea again.
Yeah. He mentions Harold Bloom, the critic, who said something about understanding poetry starting with mastering elusiveness.
Okay, sounds intense.
It does. But Zapruder pushes back quite strongly, and I think his counterpoint is really freeing.
What does he say?
He basically says the journey into a poem starts much simpler. It starts by just reading the words.
Okay, sounds almost too simple, but I get it.
Well, yeah, but think about it. He emphasizes we are all experts in words. We use them constantly, every day.
That's right.
And if you hit a word you don't know in a poem, look it up. That's what dictionaries are for. It's not a trick.
So less about deciphering hidden meanings and more about just engaging with the language that's right there.
Exactly. Zapruder suggests we need to actively, forget some of the maybe unhelpful stuff we learned in school about poetry.
Like the constant hunt for the theme or the message.
That's a big one, yeah.
Yeah.
He wants us to accept what's on the page first. The book really tries to guide us back to a simpler way of paying attention, focusing on what poetry is actually for.
Which brings us to that core question he poses, right? Instead of getting bogged down in what poetry is because it looks like so many different things, we should ask why. Why is it written? What unique thing does it do?
And he argues that our difficulty often comes from not realizing we read poetry for different reasons than we read, say, a news report or instructions.
It serves a different purpose.
A fundamentally different purpose. And here's where it gets really interesting. He talks about how the knowledge, the insight you get from a poem, that feeling of why it feels necessary, often can't quite be put into other words.
You can't just summarize it easily.
Right. He suggests the more powerful the poem, the harder it can be to neatly explain its effect afterward.
He brings in that John Ashbery poem, doesn't he? Paradoxes and oxymorons.
He does, yeah. It captures that feeling perfectly, like you're almost grasping something vital the poem offers, but it keeps slipping away, like Ashbery says, lost in the steam and chatter of typewriters.
It's like trying to describe a specific feeling or a dream, isn't it? You know it was important, but the words just fall short.
Exactly that. And Zapruder sees this experience, getting language close to the unsayable, as central to poetry.
So how do we approach that? Uncertainty.
Well, he brings in Keats's idea of negative capability, which sounds complicated, but the core idea is about being comfortable with uncertainty, with ambiguity. It means resisting that immediate urge to find a neat, logical explanation for everything in the poem.
So negative capability is like saying no to needing an instant answer, staying open to the experience, even if it's a bit confusing.
You got it. It's about letting the poem work on you, rather than you trying to wrestle it into submission, find the right answer immediately. It's about being okay with mystery.
Letting go of that rigid thinking.
Precisely. And Zapruder suggests his own book tries to do that in prose, exploring, questioning, not claiming to have all the final answers. He even shares some personal stories about how he came to poetry to kind of illustrate this.
Oh yeah, those were great. He talks about finding poetry really dull and old-fashioned in school at first.
Right, like many of us.
But then he describes seeing Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts, that painting by Bruegel, and the poem about it.
The Icarus one?
Yeah. The boy falling from the sky and the world just carrying on. Plowmen plowing, ship sailing by. That indifference, they said that hit him hard.
It's a powerful moment of realization, isn't it? About suffering and how the world often just ignores it. A single poem changing his perspective.
And he also remembers being fascinated as a kid by Longfellow's Song of Hiawatha. Not even understanding it all.
No, just the sound.
Just the sound. The rhythm of the words, how they connected to the trees and lake he could see outside the window.
It's like he was experiencing the material of language, its physicality, which is another key point Zapruder makes.
The idea that poems create a space where language isn't just for information, but it's a thing in itself, like clay or paint.
Exactly. It has sound, shape on the page, texture, rhythm. He argues this really sets poetry apart from most other writing.
Which is mostly about getting a message across efficiently.
Right. Poetry, he says, embraces the uncertainties, the slipperiness of words, but also their amazing power to connect us in unexpected ways. It kind of celebrates that gap between the word and the thing it points to.
And that's where deeper truths can emerge, maybe ones that straightforward language can't quite capture.
Yes. Which leads us away from that idea of message hunting.
So we shouldn't go into a poem thinking the poet has buried some treasure, some single meaning we have to dig up.
That's a huge misconception Zapruder wants to dismantle. Poets generally aren't trying to be deliberately obscure or hide things.
It's not a riddle.
It's not usually meant to be. The common idea is we're supposed to decode some central, often kind of boring message. But Zapruder thinks readers who love poetry aren't looking to be impressed by cleverness. They're looking for an experience, a feeling.
A connection.
Yeah. He touches on modern poetry sometimes feeling difficult, like Eliot's The Wasteland, where some context does help.
Sure, that one's famously dense.
But then he uses Paul Eluard's line, "The earth is blue like an orange."
Huh. Okay, that sounds impossible.
Right. But it forces you to stop, to think. How can the earth be blue like an orange? It disrupts your expectations of language and pushes you to just engage with the words themselves and the strange image they create.
It makes you look at blue and orange and earth differently.
Exactly. And he uses Whitman, too, Song of Myself.
Yeah.
That kid asking, what is the grass?
Such a simple question.
But Whitman doesn't give a simple answer. He speculates, he imagines the grass is the flag of my disposition or maybe the handkerchief of the Lord. It shows poetry's power to transform the ordinary through imagination.
Creating unexpected links. That's beautiful. He also mentions Wallace Stevens, right? Tea at the Plaza of Hoon.
Mm-hmm. That poem creates such a specific, strange, almost dreamlike atmosphere. The speaker becomes the source of the world's wonders. It's all about imagination shaping reality through language.
And then there's making the familiar strange, defamiliarization.
Yes. Langston Hughes's tiny poem, Suicide's Note, "The calm, cool face of the river asked me for a kiss."
Wow. That hits hard. It makes the river seem suddenly alive and sinister.
It jolts you into seeing the river and maybe the feeling behind the poem in a completely new way. It reveals an emotional depth.
He does something similar discussing Dickinson's I Felt a Funeral in My Brain.
Oh, that one's incredible. He focuses on how the poem doesn't just describe a feeling, it enacts it. The rhythm, the breaks, the imagery, it pulls you into that experience of mental fragmentation.
Making the words feel startlingly real.
Yeah. And then he contrasts that intensity with Machado's At a Friend's Burial. Very different tone.
Much more direct, almost stark.
Very clear, unsentimental. He points out that odd, simple phrasing, "They gave him earth," the finality of it.
That directness is powerful too. And he connects this idea of language's power, its potential for honesty, to poems dealing with trauma, like Adrienne Rich's Rape.
Yes, and Roxane Gay's essay on the language around sexual violence, how poetry can reclaim the terrible weight of words we've maybe become numb to through misuse or euphemism.
Finding words matter again.
Which leads to a really vital point about responsibility. He briefly touches on Adorno's famous line about poetry after Auschwitz.
That it's barbaric.
Well, Zapruder connects it to the misuse of language during horrific times, the way words can be twisted to hide truth. So there's a moral need to use language thoughtfully, precisely, to resist language that obscures reality.
That feels really relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit, he talks about the machine of poetry, form.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts. He uses William Carlos Williams's famous red wheelbarrow.
So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow.
Exactly. Those line breaks. They force you to slow down, to look at each piece. It makes the ordinary, a wheelbarrow, rain, chickens, feel suddenly significant. It's how it's arranged on the page.
It's not just the words, but the spaces between them, too.
Right. And he contrasts that with Dickinson again, her dashes and capitalized words, creating tension in her own unique rhythm.
But it's not always about traditional form, is it? Like rhyme and meter?
No, definitely not. He points out, like Aristotle did, that just putting history into verse doesn't make it poetry. And he mentions Baudelaire's prose poems, poetry without line breaks, but still poetry.
Still doing that poetic work with language.
But he doesn't dismiss traditional forms either. Rhyme and rhythm still have power. He mentions an analysis of a Shakespeare couplet, how the rhyme gives it a feeling of rightness, of completion.
And even free verse has its own subtle music, right? Conceptual rhymes, maybe?
Yeah, echoes of ideas or images instead of just sounds. It's all part of the poem's construction.
This thing connects to something called reverie.
It's a concept from psychoanalyst Thomas Ogden, that state of kind of dreaming while you're awake, that slightly drifting state of mind.
Okay.
Zapruder suggests poetry is like a constructed conversation on the frontier of dreaming. It's a way language gives us conscious access to that more intuitive, associative, pre-conscious part of our minds.
Wow, I like that. Poetry is a doorway to that inner world.
Yeah. And he brings in Wallace Stevens again, his idea of the poet's job, not necessarily to lead people or comfort them, but to activate their imagination, to help them live their own lives more fully.
By sharing an imaginative experience.
Exactly. He uses W.S. Merwin's After the Dragonflies as a poem that uses a dreamlike space to make us really feel the danger the natural world is in.
Viscerally feel it, not just intellectually understand it.
And a key way poetry creates these imaginative experiences is through association.
Linking things you wouldn't normally link.
Right. All poetry does this, he argues. He uses Terence Hayes' poem, The Avocado, which is amazing.
I haven't read that one.
Oh, it weaves together thoughts about abolition, hunger, attraction, the texture of an avocado. Completely disparate things.
Seriously, how does that work?
It just does. It creates this complex, layered understanding by letting these different threads touch and resonate. It shows how our minds actually work, making unexpected connections.
Like Jane Hirschfield's idea of a window opening up in a poem.
Exactly, expanding the view through surprising links. He also notes how poems often end with these memorable aphoristic lines.
Lines that stick with you, like Auden's "Stop all the clocks."
Yes, or Rilke's "You must change your life" at the end of the Apollo Torso poem. Little nuggets of resonance.
And underpinning so much of this is metaphor, isn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. That unexpected comparison, linking two unlike things, boom, it activates the language, makes you see both things differently.
Makes the ordinary sparkle a bit. He uses another Stevens poem, Gubbinal, to show how metaphor saves the world from just being ugly and sad.
It transforms reality. And related to metaphor is symbolism.
Okay, how's that different?
Zapruder explains symbolism as going through the ordinary thing to something beyond. The word or image carries this whole field of related meanings, more than just its literal definition. He uses his own poem about eggs.
Eggs meaning?
Yeah.
Potential.
Life.
Fragility.
All of that, yeah.
Right.
Not explicitly stated, but carried by the image. He mentions Baudelaire's Correspondences poem as embodying that state of symbolic connection, where sounds and colors and scents all seem to echo each other.
And haiku, packing huge meaning into tiny spaces.
Perfect example. He also talks about kids having this natural grasp of the symbol.
True, they live in worlds of make-believe.
And poems about childhood, like Elizabeth Bishop's Sestina, can bring back those forgotten ways of seeing. The repeated words in the Sestina house, grandmother, child, stove, almanac, tears, they just gather weight and meaning each time they appear.
That poem is haunting. The repetition builds such emotion. Zapruder then gets into Dickinson again, and her focus on nothing.
Yeah, the power of the unsaid, the importance of emptiness or silence, how nothing can actually renovate the world. He contrasts her withdrawal with Whitman's initial boisterous embrace of everything.
So sometimes stepping back, embracing that nothingness, is necessary for poetry.
He suggests it is. Poets as alchemists of nothingness, turning silence and absence into something palpable. Dickinson's reclusiveness, Whitman's loafing. Maybe these were ways of creating that necessary space.
It reminds me of that odd line, poetry makes nothing happen.
Yes, but he follows it immediately with, it survives. It survives in the valley of its making, becoming a way of happening, a mouth. It persists.
So it doesn't directly change policy, maybe, but it changes us, our perception.
That seems to be the idea. Which leads him to his conclusion, referencing Stephen's one last time, final soliloquy of the interior paramour.
And the idea of the world imagined as the ultimate good.
Exactly. Connected to the vital boundary of our own minds. The poem becomes this shared space for imagining, for remembering what it feels like to be truly alive, awake, and free within ourselves.
That's a powerful place to end up.
It really is. So if we boil it down, the big takeaways are, poetry isn't really a puzzle box. It's an experience with language.
Right. Using language in unique ways.
Yeah.
Making connections.
Getting at deeper stuff, maybe. And it offers this vital space for imagination, which feels pretty important in our, very noisy world.
Absolutely. So maybe the invitation here is to go back to a poem that felt tricky before. Just pick up a new one, but with this different lens.
Yeah, with a more open mind. Don't hunt for the meaning. Look for those sparks, those surprising links, those moments where the language just does something to you.
Let yourself feel it, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe just consider this. In a world rushing to define everything, what happens when you deliberately slow down with language, enter that imaginative space poetry offers, and just see what unfolds?